Hello and welcome back. Today I want to start closed loops. Open loops. Today we're going to do loops, open and closed loops, but we're going to start with an open loop first. Now, it's called an open loop not because it's a hook, but because it's openable. So I've got a piece of 16 gauge wire here. You can do these with, 18 gauge wire, even as small as 20 gauge wire, but I would recommend doing some hammering or something to a 20 gauge wire to make sure it's super hard and it's going to hold its shape. You want to start out with a piece of wire. This is probably 2 or 3 inches, and I want to make sure I have a nice flush cut on both ends of my wire. I can see right now that I have a very pointed end. So I'm going to cut those pointed ends off. I collect them. I've got my extra wire container here that I can put it all into. That's all solid copper. It's another reason to pick a material and stick with it. So in order to make an open loop, you need a set of round nose pliers. If you grab onto your wire on the very end of your pliers, you're going to get a small loop. If I grab it here, I'm going to get a medium-sized loop. If I grab it here, I'm going to get a very large loop because the size of my plier jaw is tapered. But wherever I grab it, whatever size loop I get, I want to line the end of this wire up parallel with the edge of my jaws so that I can just feel that wire end sticking out. You don't want it sticking out like this, and you don't want it like sticking in here because then your pliers will just slip off the edge. So you really do need to make it flush so you can just barely feel it with the edge of your jaws here, okay? That's a really important step, is grabbing your wire in the right spot in the first place. Now, I want to wrap this wire tightly around my plier jaw. So I'm going to get my thumb right in next to my plier jaw. This does take some strength, and I'm going to start curving it around my plier jaw. Now, I don't want it to focus on that or that. How about we focus on what I'm doing? Come on, you can do it. There we go. All right, so I've almost got this all the way around, but my wrist is already twisted quite far. So I'm going to let go, reposition, and grab on. What you don't want to do is grab on a different part of your jaw, okay? You want to make sure that your jaw is filling up and you're grabbing on the same part of your jaw. Now I'm going to keep going and finish bending this all the way around until my wire end is butt right into my wire there. This is what we call a P-loop for, I hope, obvious reasons. So there are times we just use the P-loop like this if I'm making a spiral and I want to continue this in the same direction. But for an open loop, I actually just want to center this loop on top of my post here. So to do that, you need to grab, I like to use the very tips of my round nose pliers to do this. The tips are going to give me a sharper bend. That's why I use the tips. Now I'm actually going to bend this post in the opposite direction until this little loop is more of a lollipop, right centered on the top of my post. That's what we're going for. Now, this is called an open loop, not because it's a hook, as I said, but because it's openable. So if I want to attach something to this loop, I don't want to just like grab onto this tail and unbend it, because a couple things are going to happen. It's going to bend in one spot. It's going to make that one spot hard and fatigued. And when I bend it back, it's not going to be a round circle anymore. It's going to be like it's going to have all kinds of weird curves in it, and it's not going to look very nice or round. Also, sometimes when you do this second bend and you center the loop on top of your post, even if your wire end was butt right in and touching before, sometimes it opens up just a little bit of a gap here. That's completely normal. Don't even worry about that. But I want to show you what to do about that gap and how to open and close this loop when you want to attach it to something. So I've got some bullnose pliers here. And what I need to do is actually grab right across my loop. Okay, so notice I'm not grabbing this way, because again, my plier jaws, they're going to grab the thing closer to this crotch first, and the things farther up here, they're not going to properly grab because we're going across two wires. You could use like parallel jaw pliers and that would grab both sides. But it's actually grabbing down here and I want it to grab closer to the end of my wire. But it does need to go right across your loop so that it's bracing on the other side of your wire. Now I'm going to lift this tail, this wire end, either up or push it down. You see I lifted it up there? That's going to allow me to attach something to this. And then in order to close it, you put it back down. And you see how it's still nicely round after I did that? And also that gap is gone. So how did I close that gap? Well, I'm going to go across my thing, my loop again. By lifting it up and down, I can kind of pull it open, or lifting it up and down, I'm kind of pulling it closed. Now I'm not just shoving it closed, I'm kind of manipulating it up and down so that it closes as I move it up and down. I hope that's clear. But that's how you open and close an open loop, and that's how you get rid of this gap in here, is by lifting this tail up and down and rotating it and slowly pushing it and working it in as you do that. Let's do another one of these on the other side because there's nothing like a quick review. So again, remember, if you want this loop to be the same size as this one, then you can actually take your Sharpie marker and you can actually draw a line. Sorry, I'm looking for my Sharpie marker. I don't know where it is. Here it is. You can actually draw a line. Silver ones will work better. Right on your plier jaws. Now, by making my loops on the same spot on that jaw over and over and over again, I'm going to get the same size of loops. Even though this is a permanent marker, this is not a permanent mark. This will wear away, and if you make a lot of loops, you'll actually have to reapply this Sharpie marker. So don't be afraid of marking your pliers. It's not actually a permanent mark, but it's a good way to make your loops consistently sized time after time after time. Once you get a lot of practice, you can just say to yourself, I'm working right in the middle, and if it ends up here or here, it's going to be close enough that nobody else will ever notice that there's a slight size difference. But if you're like a real perfectionist and you need exactly the same size time after time, then put a mark on your round nose pliers. All right, back to these. Quick review. Remember, the end of your wire needs to be flush against the side of your pliers. Bring your thumb in real close and reposition, and I can feel this wire stop because it's butt right in there. That's my P-loop. Now let's center my P-loop. I need to grab this back neck as low down as I can with one jaw inside the loop and one jaw outside the loop, and I'm going to push on this a little bit until that's centered. And you see that gap opened up just a little bit. So let's bring our pliers back in, up and down and up and down until that's touching again. So this is our open loop because we can open it. It's openable. One more thing I want to mention about this, depending on what you're using this piece for, say you've got an earring post up here and it has a loop going this way, so this one's going to hang naturally this way, and then I've got a bead here, and now I've got something on the bottom, maybe a charm, and I want it to hang so it's facing forward or a certain direction. Depending on what you're using this for, you might need these two loops to be oriented in the same direction and the same plane, or you might actually need them oriented opposite. So they're like at 90 degrees from each other. What you need is going to depend on what you're using this for and your design. But I actually don't even worry about that when I make the second loop. I just come in after and I orient these loops however I need them afterwards, and that little twist, remember, is going to harden the wire in your post. So don't be afraid of twisting this post. That's going to do nothing but harden it, which is going to be a good thing for your piece holding its shape at the end of you making it. All right, so this is an open loop. If you're anything like me and you love your beads, my first instinct is, I want to put a bead on that. Obviously you'd do that before you did your second loop here. However, this is a 16 gauge wire, and 16 gauge wire is more than 1 millimeter thick. And if you have any experience working with beads, you'll know that different beads have different sizes of holes. This one here is not, it does have a hole, but it's not going to be big enough to fit over this 16 gauge wire. So we have two options. We can either drill out our hole to make the hole bigger so it does fit over something this thick, or a much easier option is to simply move to a thinner gauge wire. However, a thinner gauge wire doesn't have the same strength as this thick wire does, and if you put an open loop in a very thin wire, you're going to find that it just pulls open with the first pull on that piece of jewelry, and that this loop is not secure enough for a thin gauge wire. So we need to do something different. We can still use our thin gauge wire. Let me just cut off a piece here of, this one is actually 22 gauge wire. I'm going to grab about 4 or 5 inches. Get rid of this. I don't know where my bead went, so let's grab another one. Okay, so we need to do something different. I'm not going to put my bead onto my wire quite yet because it's just going to fall off the bottom, and that's annoying. I am, however, going to hold the wire right in the middle where the bead is going to go. Okay, that's going to be kind of my marker for the bead later. Then I need to grab my round nose pliers, and I need to grab onto the wire just above where my bead is going to go. Now I'm going to bend the top of this wire against my back plier jaw away from me, almost 90 degrees. So I've kind of got a sharp bend right there. Okay, now I need to hold the wire, let go with my pliers, and rotate them from horizontal to vertical and basically grab onto the other side of this loop. Okay, I've split this into 2 steps because of what needs to happen when we get to the other side of the bead. And I want all the steps to be the same. Okay, so now we're holding on to the other side of the wire, but this bend is still hugging this bottom jaw, okay? So now this tail that's pointing away from me, I need to bring it up towards myself and down. This is completely counterintuitive. You want to push it down back here? Don't. You want to bring it up towards yourself and down. Now my pliers are in the way again, so I need to let go, rotate them around to the top, and grab on again. If that's a really uncomfortable movement going from here to here, you can let go, take your top jaw out, and stick your bottom jaw in. Just make sure you don't grab it here. Make sure you stick it in as far as it wants to go, and then you grab the top of that loop that we're making. Okay, so however you get here, I don't care, but this is what you want, where you want to be. So now I'm going to take this short tail, the one I've been working with this whole time, and it doesn't matter if you bring it on this side or on this side. I usually bring it on the side that's easier, but you want to cross that post and make a 90-degree angle between your original post and the tail you're working with. Dun, da, da, da. Let's get rid of our round nose pliers. You'll notice that my wire crosses right at the same point that I made that bend, and I've got a fairly nice round circle. So from here, we're making a closed loop, and a closed loop means that we cannot open this loop after it's made, okay? If I need to attach this loop to something, I need to attach it now simply by opening up where it's crossed a little bit to the side, sliding whatever is in there, and then pinching that closed. So assuming that I have attached this to something already, or maybe I don't need to, maybe I'm going to attach it to something later with a jump ring, I'm going to hold across that loop that I've made, completely covering it up. I'm going to take this shorter tail that's pointing away from me, and I'm going to wrap it around the post. I like 3 wraps, but you know, that's me and my odd numbers. You need at least 1 full wrap to make this secure. You can do 10 wraps though if you want. Let's see if there's a little gap in here. You can actually squeeze them together. That's not bad though. All right, so that is my closed loop. You can see why I can't actually open this again later. From here, you want to get a good set of flush cutters, and you want to get in real close and cut this tail off. And then I'm going to come back in, because often you can feel a little scratchy bit where you cut that tail off. And I'm going to kind of massage that tail into my post until I can't feel it anymore. You're going to be your own worst critic, and you want to do that until you can't feel it. It doesn't feel scratchy. So that's my first open loop, or closed loop. I apologize, I can't keep these straight today. I'm ready for my bead. Let's stick my bead onto the other end here. Slide it down. Okay, so I want to stop here and just take a close look at what we've done. We've made our loop. We've got this little gap here between our loop and our bead where our wraps sit. Now, in order to make this the same on the other side, we need to do just a little bit of planning ahead. We actually need to leave a small little gap here where we're going to come back and make our loops. After we've left that small gap, we're going to make our wrap, and then we're going to come back and do these wraps. So what that actually looks like, this gets more familiar with time, but to start with, you kind of have to estimate how much space you need to leave on the other side of your bead to leave room for those wraps after. So what I like to do is I kind of bring my plier jaws over top of these wraps, and I push them up far enough so that they're kind of, the width is the same width as my wraps. That's kind of just going to give me a place to estimate from. So I'm going to grab on the same spot on my plier jaws so that I have the right space for these wraps at the end. I hope that was clear. So from here, the steps are the same. I need to bend this away from me, almost 90 degrees. And when I take my pliers off, I've got this little straight piece coming out of my bead that's hopefully just the right length for those wraps. Okay, so from here, I was holding on like this. I need to let go and bring my pliers to the other side of that bend. Now this bottom jaw is still tight against this corner. And where you grab on your jaws on the second bend is going to dictate the size of this loop, okay? So this wire is pointing away from me. I need to bring it up towards myself and down. Let's reposition our pliers, let go, bring them up to the top. Now this tail is going to go down and away from me, and it's going to cross right where that first bend is. Now, if you want to attach this loop to something, you have to do it now. The next one will attach. This one, I don't have anything to attach it to. So I'm just going to grab across that loop, and I'm going to start my wraps. I am pulling gently on this. You don't want to pull too hard or you'll pull your post out of straight, if that makes sense. All right, and then just keep wrapping until you're tight to your bead. If that ends up as 3.5 or 4 wraps, that's fine. Nobody else is going to count your wraps. If it ends up as only 2 wraps, that's okay too. So this is the flush side of my cutters. I'm going to get it so the tips of my cutters are touching my bead. That's going to get you the closest cut. This is the flush side here. And so that doesn't bounce away. And then always make sure your cut side doesn't leave any scratchy little bits. Use your finger more than your eyes, that's going to tell you. This is kind of a little off center. I'm just going to squeeze that and move it more in line with how I want it. Good. And again, depending on what you want for orientation, you can twist these loops so they're the same or so they're opposite. That's totally up to you and your design. Let's do this again. When I do teach this in person, I make them do at least 4 of these beads because there's a lot of steps and I want you to remember them all. So I'll get this one out of the way for now. Let's do that again just for the sake of review. I'm going to hold my wire in the middle where the bead is going to go. There's no point putting the bead on it now because it'll just fall off the bottom. My round nose pliers, grabbing just above there, bending the top away from me. I need to grab onto the other side of that bend, bring this up towards myself and down, and bring that up to the top of the loop and continue down and away. I'm ready to do my wraps. If you're not going to attach this to anything, if you're attaching it to anything, it's too late. You'll have to unwrap these wraps and do your attaching. And then rewrap these wraps with slightly fatigued wire, which is still absolutely possible, just a little more difficult. Always, 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 anytime you cut a wire end off, double check that you're not leaving an itchy bit. I'm ready for my next bead. Right there. All right, so again, I got a little funny angle going on here. Let's just straighten this out. That looks better. All right. So again, I need to leave this little gap. I'm going to just estimate myself this time. I'm not worried about the orientation of my loops to each other. All right. So my tail is up. I'm going to press this away from me, almost 90 degrees. Let go, grab the other side of that bend just a little farther up so you get a decent sized loop. Bring it towards yourself and down, up towards yourself and down. Let's reposition our pliers up at the top of that loop and bring this down and away. Now put your pliers down. Stop, 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 stop. It's so easy to just, all right, now it's time to start wrapping. But it's a closed loop, remember. You cannot attach something to this later. So I am going to put the loop from my first one over that tail, and I kind of click it into place. Oops, that's just going to rotate all over the place on me. Okay. So this one that's finished is just hanging. Oh, there we go. Now you need to grab across the loop that we're working on. So don't worry about this one over here. You need to grab across this loop here, and now you're ready to do your wraps. FYI, if you happen to come in and you grab it this way, it looks like it's the same. I'm grabbing across the loop that I'm working on. But this is going to make it really awkward for you to do your wraps, because now you have to do your wraps over on the back side of your hand because they're over here. And this loose bead is ended up in between your hands, and this tail ended up kind of behind the hand that you're holding your tool with. So it's much better just to flip this around so that the finished ones are hanging behind this hand, and this tail ends up between your hands, between your pliers and your hands. And that's going to be much less awkward for doing this wrap. So just watch out for that one little thing. It seems subtle, but it's going to make a huge difference to how easy this whole thing is. Bringing in my flush cutters. And always want to, every time you cut a wire end off, massage that down. I've got really good flush cutters, so massaging that tail down is easy for me. If you have kind of not so good flush cutters that don't get really close and you end up with like a tail that sticks off that you have to massage around and work around that post, you're going to spend a lot more time on that finishing step. And I just have had a lot of practice, so I can do that quickly and easily. But it does take practice. All right. One more quick review just to make sure we get all of this. Holding this in the middle where my bead is going to go. Grabbing with the tips of my round nose pliers just above that point. Push that away from me almost 90 degrees. Let go. Rotate it to the other side of that bend. Grab on. Bring this up towards me and down. Now my plier jaws are in the way, so let's get them up out of the way. And now this same tail down and away from me. I am going to start my wraps. Always before you start your wraps, take a moment and ask yourself, am I attaching this to anything? And you can only proceed on to your wraps if the answer is no. All right. This tail is getting awfully short. There we go. There's my 3 wraps. A lot of times when you start doing this and you're like, wow, that's a lot of waste wire that I'm cutting off. I'm going to cut my piece shorter next time and not have all that waste wire. Well, the problem with that thought is that it's less waste wire and more working wire. Without this tail to work with, you're going to spend about 3 times longer making your loops or whatever it is you're making, because you're going to have to grab onto that wire end with your pliers rather than your fingers. It's going to be a lot harder to make it do exactly what you want. It's not going to turn out as neat. So, and remember that all these tails I'm cutting off, they can get melted down. They're all going to go into my scrap bin and get sent away and get melted down. So it's not truly waste. All right, let's leave this gap here. Bend that away. Reposition a little farther up towards myself and down. Let go, rotate it up to the top of that loop, go down and away. Put your pliers down. Stop, stop, stop. We need to attach. So let's bring this into here. I kind of just snap it in place. It needs to be right in that other loop. Okay, from here, I'm grabbing across the loop that I'm working on, making sure this tail is between my hands, and I'm ready for my wraps. These chains can be a lot of fun to make once you get going on them, and once you get a little bit quicker, they can really dress up a pendant that you've made in the middle. Oh, I'm having a heck of a time grabbing onto that one. There we go. And make sure you don't have a cut end that's scratchy or itchy or anything like that. All right, that feels good to me. So these are closed loops. So we have done open loops and we have done closed loops. And I hope you appreciate the difference now. These are, in my opinion, essential building blocks. I mean, I knew nothing but these closed loops for about 20 years, and I made so many pairs of earrings. So these alone are very, very empowering. You can do a lot with these loops or with these loops. Feel free to put things together. Remember, this can get opened like this. Maybe you're going to attach that to there and attach this to here. And now, I mean, I don't know what I'm making, but you can get really creative attaching things together. So I want you to have fun with this. And the next video, we are going to do some coils and some spirals, some other building blocks of basic wire work. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.